As we have walked along our journey with Jesus throughout this holy season of Lent that helps us get ready for first the cross on Good Friday and then the empty tomb on Easter Sunday morning, we've been reading through verses in the Gospel of John, and we've seen where Jesus has taken us and what he has been up to. We're in chapter 11 today. In the chapter before, in chapter 10, Jesus had gone back to Jerusalem, and he was preaching as he did, and he upset the religious leaders, as he usually did. And that time it got so serious that the religious people tried to stone him and grab him. So he had to evade and make an escape. He took his disciples across the Jordan River to the other side, not too far away from Jerusalem, but far enough to be out of danger. And then we start chapter 11 today. In this chapter, we will get an update on some of Jesus's best friends in the world. 3 siblings, the 2 sisters Mary and Martha, and their brother Lazarus. They lived in the town of Bethany, which was right next to Jerusalem. So whenever Jesus would travel to Jerusalem for some of the annual religious festivals, he would often stay there at his friend's house. And there is other stories in the Gospels where we got to know Mary and Martha some more and got to appreciate they had different spiritual gifts and different characteristics. And Lazarus, their brother, was a dear friend of Jesus. And we hear in this chapter that Lazarus has become deathly sick. I'll read a few verses at the beginning and then a few in the middle and then a few at the end to give us the highlights. But I encourage you afterwards to take time to read the whole chapter through. So this is a reading from the Gospel according to John, chapter 11, verses 1 through 7, 38 to 48, and 53 to 54. Hear now the word of the Lord. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This is Mary, whose brother Lazarus, now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." Verse 38. And Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb where Lazarus lay dead. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. "What are we accomplishing?" they asked. "Here is this man performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation." So from that day on, they plotted to take his life. Therefore, Jesus no longer moved about publicly among the people of Judea. Instead, he withdrew to a region near the wilderness, to a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples. May God bless the reading of this holy word today. Now, usually when this story is read about Lazarus dying and Jesus bringing him back to life, usually you kind of stop reading it at around verses 44 or 45, because the focus is usually on that incredible miracle that occurs. And when I preached on this text a few years ago, I naturally did the same thing. I stopped about right there. So when I noticed that this story was coming up around again in the Bible verse calendar that I use, I wondered what to say about it this time. And that's when I read the rest of the story. I think the first time that we read and think about this story, it's right that we focused on the most important, amazing thing. Jesus has the incredible divine power to give life, to rescue life, and to overcome death. Being inspired by that is part of the bedrock of our faith. We follow a God of resurrection. We are resurrection people. So, now that I have decided to follow Jesus, as the hymn sings, it's time to take note of what happens next. As Jesus followers, disciples of Christ, we need to be ready for whatever the world will throw at us. And apparently, the world can throw some pretty rough stuff. Our text today shows that resurrection can be dangerous. It might inspire the people around you, but it also might inspire some enemies. And I don't know what's more surprising, that Jesus could bring someone back from the dead, or the fact that because he did it, people despised him for it. Isn't that terrible? Everyone should be celebrating in total awe, blown away by such an amazing miracle. But some don't like it. Who? Well, it just happened to be the same people that had already decided they didn't like Jesus anyway. So this miracle just makes them madder, makes them want to work even harder to get rid of him. It reminds me of a good rule of life. If you think God hates the same people you do, you're doing it wrong. And the Pharisees had that problem. They never liked Jesus because of the radical message he preached about God's amazing grace and that anyone could receive it. Even if they didn't follow all the religious laws in the Bible's Old Testament that the Pharisees insisted you had to follow. So the Pharisees felt Jesus was blasphemous, that he was disobeying Bible verses that were right there in black and white. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Now, it's easy for us today to judge those Pharisees. They're the bad guys of the Gospels, after all. But we should not. I discourage people today from judging Pharisees too harshly, because we can all act like Pharisees sometimes. We all give in to the temptation to think that we are right, and that what we like just happens to be the best way that things should be, and that God probably agrees with us. If someone or some church starts doing things we don't like, our disapproval flares up pretty quickly. There are a lot of different issues out in the world like that. Let me give you just one simple example. I heard about these from a Lutheran music ministry newsletter a few years ago and kept them. It printed out some complaint letters that pastors had received about worship music. People can be very opinionated when it comes to music styles, what they like, what they don't, what other people shouldn't like. And usually, whatever style a person happens to like, what do you know? They think that style is the best. And whatever style they don't like, what do you know? It happens to be no good at all. So here are 3 letters from folks who are really unhappy about the contemporary music being used in their churches. Here's the first one. Dear Pastor, was it the pianist's idea or yours that our normally peaceful worship service was disrupted by that new song last Sunday? The music was sacrilegious, more like something you'd hear in a bar, not a church. Don't expect me to sing it next time. Dear Pastor, please don't use any more new worship songs. What's so wrong with the inspiring hymns we grew up with? When I go to church, it's to worship God, not be distracted by learning new music. Last Sunday's was particularly unnerving. While the words were good, the tune was practically unsingable. Here's the last one. Dear Pastor, I'm not a music scholar, but I feel like I know appropriate church music when I hear it. And last Sunday's new hymn, if you can call it that, sounded like some love ballad. If you keep playing that trash for us in God's house, don't be surprised if many of our church members look for a new place to worship. The hymns we grew up with were all that we need. Yikes. Harsh words. But like I said, people can be very opinionated about their preferred music style. Although the article also included the years that those letters were written and the specific songs they were complaining about. Would you like to know what they are? So the first letter was written in the year 1874 about the hymn, I Love to Tell the Story. So sacrilegious, right? Ugh, gosh, give me a break with that one. The second letter was written in the year 1890 about the hymn, What a Friend We Have in Jesus. So unsingable, am I right? Ugh. And the third letter was written in the year 1865 about the hymn, if you can even call it a hymn, Just As I Am. Ugh, I know. You never liked those, did you? No. It's just a common reaction for people to not like new things simply because they're new and you're not used to them. We like what we're used to, and we're suspicious of anything that's different. That suspicion usually makes us declare the new thing is bad, even if it's actually totally fine. But we just naturally dislike new ways of doing things, new ways to understand things, and the people who encourage such change. But God is making all things new. So be careful what you complain about. You might find yourself really embarrassed 100 years from now if your complaint letter ends up in some preacher's sermon in the year 2123. You don't want to be referenced thusly. The Pharisees never liked the new ideas Jesus taught about when he preached. New ideas about what's okay and what's not. Updating their understanding of how God works and moving past all the strict laws they clung to. The Pharisees didn't like Jesus, but they thought they could deal with him. And it's not until more and more people start putting their faith in him, it's said in verse 45, really following him and listening to him. That's when the Pharisees realize they need to start working on a plan to have him killed. But why so harsh? And why right then? It told us politics. Jesus just wants to bring resurrection to Lazarus and everybody. So what's so wrong with that? Well, the Pharisees worry about this new life that Jesus is throwing around willy-nilly, inspiring lots of people. If Jesus gets too many followers, he might start a real movement, and that might upset the apple cart. The Pharisees were the religious leaders. They had a lot of power and influence because they had made a deal with the government at the time, the Roman Empire. They made a deal with the empire. They had coupled their influence and authority with the state, for better and for worse, mostly for worse. Now they think that the success of their church or faith depends on what is happening in the state's politics, so they get nervous. You can see them worried about what Rome will do in verse 48. But Jesus doesn't care about what Rome, what the empire will do. Jesus only cares about God's mission of bringing new life. He doesn't worry about what the government wants to do. He's focused on what God wants to do, bringing resurrection. But that's kind of why resurrection has some side effects in the worldly world. So because of this, Jesus can't walk around near the Pharisees anymore, and he has to withdraw to the wilderness, out in the desert, in verse 54. Bummer. His disciples go with him too. And throughout the Gospels, the disciples never held back from complaining about anything or saying how confused they are over what was happening. So you can be sure that they whined a lot out there and said, really? The wilderness? We got to go out in the desert? Man, nobody told me anything about this. This isn't what I signed up for. But apparently that is one of the possible side effects of resurrection. Maybe following Jesus should come with a disclaimer. Maybe when we celebrate someone's baptism here in our church, we should say, we're so happy you've received new life from God. Possible side effects may include living in the wilderness, speaking with strange people, being nice to folks who aren't nice to you, doing things that are awkward, helping anyone you see, forgiving everyone, and being criticized by people who think you're not being responsible. Nobody told me that stuff when I got baptized. I don't know if they told you. I didn't know there were any side effects. I was all smiles. When I got baptized, I thought, no, I'm living on easy street. It's only going to be good days from here, right? It's kind of like those commercials for medications that we see all the time, where they say really awesome things about what the medicine might do, but then at the very end of the commercial, really, really fast, in quiet words, they rip off all these side effects. They say side effects might include terrible things like blah, 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 blah. You can't really hear them, but some of them sounded worse than the actual sickness that you have right now, that you're getting medication for. It makes me wonder if somebody had told Lazarus all the side effects about resurrection while he was still in the grave, how unpleasant and challenging they might be. I wonder if he would have considered just staying there. Maybe it was peaceful being dead and stepping out into the light to face the hard challenges of the world isn't appealing. I mean, I kind of feel that way every morning when my alarm goes off, you know, all wrapped up in my warm and cozy blankets. I'd rather just stay there in the tomb of my bed with my bed clothes on, not step out into the harsh world. It's always tempting to just roll over pull the covers up a little higher, and not give up. Not get up, not get up, but just give up instead. For anyone like me who is not a morning person, that's an everyday struggle. You have to grit your teeth and say a prayer just to get out of bed. Help me, Jesus, as you get out of bed and figure out what hurts today. Oh, that's it. That's what hurts today. And when you do crawl your way out of your bed grave to do the stuff you need to do, you're still not totally awake yet while you do them. It usually takes me about 2 hours and a cup of tea before I'm fully awake. But before that, just going through the motions. Hello, good morning, yes. Do you ever feel that way? If you are a morning person, be thankful. Y'all can wake up, get up, and start moving immediately. And the rest of us are jealous. It takes us hours to do that. Or, whether you are a morning person or not, do you ever feel like that maybe for whole days? Like you haven't fully woken up for the whole entire day? I kind of felt like last week was like that. The bad time change day just made me groggy all week. Like you're just a zombie all through a day, just going through the motions in life for the whole day. So yes, you didn't stay in the grave of your bed. You did get out, but you weren't totally alive. Like coming out of the grave, but still having your grave clothes on and trying to go through life. Notice how after Lazarus had been resurrected and come out of the tomb into the world, he actually still had his grave clothes on. In verse 44, until Jesus said to take them off so he could fully experience his new life. So don't keep your grave clothes on either, whatever it is that pulls you down and holds you back. Don't fall and stumble through life with one foot still in the grave, just going through the motions in a haze, mindlessly like a zombie. These days, there's not people coming out of literal tombs, but there are people, maybe some of you, who have really experienced new life. People who had been lifeless and are finally woken up to the real life that is around. Jesus still calls people to come out of the hole they are stuck in, to be awake and woke to the real world. He calls us all to get up, to step out, take off our grave clothes, and go. So what's keeping you back? What's holding you down, either in the grave, or if you manage to get up, does it still feel like you've got your grave clothes on? Are you asleep and passive in a tomb? Then God calls you to come out. Are you walking around with grave clothes hanging off of you, dragging you down? Then hear the voice of God that calls you by name, telling you to toss them off and get moving. Be cheered on by the words of Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1, that says, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race that is marked out for us. Did you hear that? There is a race that is marked out for each of you. God has marked out a race of your life and says, go, 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 go. And we are all cheering for you. God is calling you today. So, what are you waiting for? Let's go. Will you pray with me? Oh God, We confess that we have so often given in to the temptation to just stay in the holes and the graves of life. It's hard some days to step out. When we do, we confess that we've kept our grave clothes hanging off of us, holding us back, keeping us from truly experiencing the full life that you want for us. So God, help us to hear your voice more clearly today. The voice of Jesus saying, come out, calling us up, out into your world. And then to hear his voice again, telling us to take off all that holds us back. Remind us, O God, that you want abundant life for us because you love us and want us to feel that abundance. May we hear it and respond and go. Amen.